Hello, this is Werewolf, the podcast. We're still in medieval England, still with Marshal, William Marshal, the greatest knight that ever was, and of course he's a werewolf, so of course he is the best knight that ever was, because werewolves are the best. Na. Anyway, if you go down to the description, there are things to do down there, like join groups, join Twitter, join Instagram. Anywhere you want to chat to us, we can chat to you. If you could follow us on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts from, if you could comment on something that would really help the podcast, that would be lovely. Thanks. Let's get back to the story. It's after the battle.
I woke. I heard bells ringing. Maybe it was a celebration of our victory. No. The bells were inside my head. The heavy blows from the beating my armor had taken were still ringing inside my head. I tried to shake them out of my pulsating skull before opening my eyes to whatever would greet me. When my eyes eventually allowed themselves to open, I lay in the field, surrounded by my fellow soldiers, live, dead, and injured. Many concerned faces were looking down at me. It took me a while for my vision to coalesce, but once contrast in color had returned, I was right relieved to recognize their colors. I had not been captured. I was behind my own lines. I shook my body and did the internal injury check. I was already pretty much healed from the damage I'd received in the melee. Blood, mud, and guts stained my armor. The plate was beaten and pierced at many points. The chainmail was ripped and rent at points where weapons had caused me damage. My gambon and underthings were soaked in my own blood. I looked dead from the outside. Those looking at me from the outside of this blessed body could not understand how I was not dead. They did not realize I would not be dead now, and I would never do so if I wished, according to my Fenrir. Shaking my head some more, it seemed to give slight relief. I swayed and managed to scramble to my feet on a second attempt. 2 soldiers helped me, and I must admit they supported me a little as the world still span and came in and out of focus. The warriors around me cheered for this miraculous resurrection. All gave congratulations to God and his host. They looked upon me as a miracle, they did. They were right to offer their thanks to God, for it was a wolfen angel that had truly helped me. They then shouted their hurrahs. Those hurrahs did not feel so good at this point. They were very loud, you see, and my head found it to be an unforgiving din. I needed to escape the noise while showing good grace. My mind was still somewhat compromised, but my thoughts then turned to Bastard, my horse. Where was he?
He's over here,
Fenrir said in my mind, and I turned to the direction that I felt Fenrir to be. I saw Bastard lying on the blood-soaked field. I knew he was dead in my mind, but I did not want it to be so. Fenrir was sat by him. I was still in a state of shock and disbelief that my beautiful horse had died. That was not the way of war. The horse was supposed to be spared. It was an unwritten rule. Soldiers were fair game. Knights were to be taken hostage and a little broken at times, but destriers were not to be hurt. They were worth so much to a knight. Years of training and of cost to them. I could have had 30 palfreys for the price of my bastard.
He's no longer here, Will.
Fenrir told me. He had much respect for this beast, as I had. We were both upset like.
Oh, he was a great being, my friend, and I will miss him,
Fenrir said. I had to remove myself from my well-wishers and excited warriors at this point. I had nothing to celebrate. Tears welled beneath this helmet of mine. Again, this helm offered protection by hiding my grief from the others. My friend was an horse, but I loved him more than any man but my liege lord. My heart was broke as my steed was gone. Eventually, I managed to get away from the crowd of celebrating men and get to my brave mount. A brave animal I had lovingly named Bastard. I know, not a name you'd associate with love, but in this case, it was a name of tribute to the beast that was. I now stood staring at him in sad disbelief. Wounds everywhere. The attacks of blade and spear had shredded him, they had. He had more arrow shafts than I could count, broken and undamaged. So many cuts to the bone on his flanks and haunches. He had so many injuries covering him that I couldn't understand how he'd managed to carry me from the field. How had he done it? What an animal. What a king of beasts. He'd given his life for mine, he had. That noble steed that he was. I cried some more. I was not caring about others seeing me. I know it may be a sign of weakness, but I felt they were tears of grief and respect in this case. Eventually, I sank to my knees and laid a gauntleted hand on his neck. I could not feel him while still gloved, so I uncovered my hand so that I could stroke that now cold hide. More tears flowed for a while as I knelt in worthy homage. Time passed, and unbeknownst to me, my fellows understood my loss and left me to do my task. After some time, I made the sign of the cross upon my chest, prayed for his passing, and then gave thanks to him for my life. He was a massive loss, a monstrous loss. I no longer had a destrier. I no longer had a war horse, but this was the least of my considerations in this moment. I had lost my fearsome partner in battle. He'd done as much damage on the field this day as I ever had. I solemnly laid my right glove and gauntlet on the horse's body. It seemed strangely appropriate to give him this little sacrifice. More tears for a few more moments. Then I took my dagger and cut free a hank of Bastard's blood-stained mane as a reminder of him, tucking that hair hank into my belt. A squire disturbed me. He'd brought me my palfrey from the baggage train. By now I was fully healed. I had no scars to offer as evidence of the violence that had been committed on this body of mine, and the young boy looked at me with a sort of worship. I should not be worshipped. That is only for God.
Sir, you live?
He was confused, looking at the horse and the armour.
How can that be? Your injuries?
He stood open-mouthed, staring at me, he was. Yes, I live, but many do not. What's your name, boy? I asked him.
My name's Llewellyn.
He told me.
But my friends call me, Welly.
I patted my palfrey and thanked Welly for bringing him. Thanking you, Welly? Can I ask you to help take care of those that need it? I am done this day, I am. I said to the boy as I swung up into the saddle. As I rode back behind the lines, the men stared at me as the boy had done. How could I be alive? Not a plate of my armour was undamaged, cleaved, or even lost to me. My helmet had been beaten and bent. It would later require the help of 2 sturdy men to help me get it from my head, as it had been dinted so severely that it pressed my skull cap and coif against my flesh. I was also covered in the drying crust of gore from the fight. Not all mine, I hasten to add. A red knight now I was, a red knight of blood and death. It was strange. I thought that I would feel joy after the battle. I'd been successful. I'd fought beyond any man's measure. I had turned a flank. I could be thanked as the reason the battle had ended when it had. But I felt loss, and my mind was exhausted. The fight was everything, you see. The aftermath was horrific in my heart. I only felt sorrow while others showed joy. That night, I sat at my lord's left in the Chateau de Tonquéville. Much merriment was made, and many toasts to those who had been hurt and lost were shared. I had won the thanks of almost all the knights, although many, including my lord, said that the level of ferociousness and recklessness that I showed would no doubt get me killed before much longer. It brought much laughter to those listening to his speech when he told them such. I tried to take it with good humour. Many of the opposition's knights had been taken and stripped of colours and armour. We did not humiliate these fellows. They would be fed and thanked for a battle well fought. And they'd bathed with us and found new cloth. In turn, they would be ransomed. There'd be a nice source of income for those who took them. The taken would have to pay for their armour, their horse, and their freedom. Either that or seek a patron to do so on their behalf. These men were brave fighters, and we had to consider that they may one day be on the other side of this moment. They would remember us for being kind if we were taken during battle as their hostages. Each knight of my lord's retinue introduced the knights they had taken and offered a part of their hold to de Tonquéville. Swords and more lay at the base of the table. Many a noble knight of Flanders saluted my lord that night and apologized for their part in the fight. Each time one was brought forward, the hall's residents cheered and drank. I was one of them, and now full of vim and cheer as well as the rich red wine that I drank in huge quantities. Another gift of my wolf angel was the ability to consume vast volumes of the gift of the vine without any consequence. I was known as the bottomless cup. Not an insult in this case, but a compliment from my fellows. The mind-befuddling liquid did not befuddle me. Now, each knight of my liege's retinue would come forth and presented something to my lord except myself. The whole turned to me expectantly, and my friend Gervais slapped me on the back.
Go on, William. You were the man of honour today. The man who did most must have many hostages and much profit from this day.
Gervais sat next to me, announced to the crowd. The crowd cheered. All around stood with raised glasses. Well, all except myself. I remained seated, head bowed. William, my lord, looked at me from his standing position and raised his cup. Silence slowly fell on the audience, and conversation murmured. I felt the flesh of my face slowly redden. I felt humiliated, and although my liege had given me the seat of honour, I had nothing to offer him.
Come now, William. Have you nothing to show for your day?
Asked my lord. Smirks now were on the faces of those who did not like me, although they hid them out of fear for my wrath and my blade in the training yard.
I say, he lost his horse to footman.
Shouted someone from the gathered knights. A little laughter flitted through the assembled men and women. The laughter was fleeting, and my liege raised his hand and shook his head to show his displeasure at the behaviour.
William,
he repeated. I have nothing, my lord. I took no hostages, I told him. My lord's head dropped like mine, and he showed his disappointment in me. That hurt much more than the wounds that had ravaged my body this day. Many of the people present here were enjoying this display. I saw them, and I put those faces in my memory. Fenrir saw others, and I also put those faces in my memory too. They would all pay for my discomfort later. Many disliked me for my closeness with de Tonquéville. They were jealous of my abilities, and although I was of low standing in the nobility of this world, my betters saw me as something special. This meant that my fellows of the same rank held grudges, although they would learn to their cost that it was not wise to gossip or openly show such disdain for me. Things happen to those who show open dislike of me. Sometimes, things that were unholy in the eyes of those gathered happened to those who berated me. There will be more happenings now, either in the training yard or in other ways.
You lost your horse?
De Tonkavi asked with evident sadness. I nodded, feeling hundreds of eyes burning into me and enjoying my discomfort.
That's a tremendous blow. I'm truly sorry, Will.
William, my lord, continued.
You only have one, do you not?
He asked. I did, my lord. I did. I replied. I went to my belt and lifted a hank of horsehair from it, held the hank to my nose to remember the scent of bastard. This is all I have now, my lord, I said, standing and bowing my head to him and showing him what I held in my hand. He was the noblest of steeds, a true king of horses, I continued, my eyes fixed on the remains of the mane in my grasp. He saved me today, he did. He got me to safety and he lost his life for it. He was braver than many men here, I said, lifting my eyes and seeing if any of those brave souls who had found mirth in my embarrassment would meet them now. None did. I smiled, knowing this. Such brave cowards they are. This I give you, my liege, I said as I bowed before him and laid it before his board. This is the last and only thing I have, I said quietly. The crowd again stirred and whispered. Small peals of laughter spread through the gathering. This time, I did not look for those that laughed at me. No, I had Fenrir to do that. They thought they were hidden from me and they could get away with belittling me. I know, again, a sin of pride, but my father had taken my worth as zero as a child and no one else would ever do so again. Well, they may do so this hour, but the night would be long and a beast would walk those corridors during the darkest moments. I continued to address my liege. And of course, I offer my loyalty, my sword, and my will to use it against all those that oppose us. Again, I let my eyes flash from face to face in the hall. Dead silence. I did not know how my lord would receive this. Would it be taken as a slight or bravado? The lord, still on his feet, picked up the horsehair lying before him and held it to his nose as he considered me. He looked at me with unknown intent. I maintained my stare into those noble eyes. He raised his cup and a hank of hair in his hand above his head.
No man can give more than William this day,
he announced.
This man, he lost everything in that battle. He lost his horse, his armour is damaged beyond repair. He's lost his sword and even his shield. But unlike you so-called brave and noble warriors, he did so to show his loyalty, and he turned the tide of battle.
Cheers now, although some given unwillingly, rocked the hall, and wine was drunk as a toast of the moment. Although excuses to drink were not needed, I nodded and smiled.
You, William, I raise my cup to you, and you will get a boon from me this day. choose from my own stable. Yes, you will have the choice of all my horses for what you did for me.
The hate wafted off many before me, and I revelled in it. That night, I returned to the shared barracks. Many of my fellows were yet missing from their beds. They may have drunk too much wine and fallen asleep where they sat, or they may have found a night of passion with someone special for those few hours. My night would be spent with some special people of my own, but I would show my passion to those who had derided me on this day in a much more terrifying way. I lay my head on my bunk and smiled. In a couple of hours, my night's work would begin. I waited as the beds got fuller with those coming home to roost. When all was finally still and the snores of the men and boys had pervaded the air, I snook from my bed, my wolf soul following behind. My first rendezvous tonight would be with Bastien de Cargou. He was a wealthy man from his father's estates and had enough money and notoriety through his father to have his own lodgings. That would be his downfall tonight, though. He hated me. I mean that. He hated me for my closeness with de Tonquerville. He would be the right-hand man if possible. It was not my fault or doing that I was. I'd not become the favourite by false effort or a want of personal gain. I got there due to the feelings of the Lord himself. Bastien had laughed hard at the loss of my horse. He had laughed at the destitution of my poor state. He had been angered by my liege's speech. He spread rumours of my pauper status and that I was taken as a son by de Tonquerville through pity alone for me. I did not hate Bastien. He was not worthy of such a thing. But I disliked his arrogance and his cupidity. He would be a worthy offering. A sacrifice of sorts. I would show him no pity tonight. He would be an example to those that spread ill of me. He would be an example of those that openly talked falsehoods about me and how they would be judged by my angel. I walked the empty hallways and corridors. The guards were nowhere to be seen. The Lord had allowed the celebrations to spread to the men and peasants. I think many had imbibed that evening. I got to Bastien's door and sent Fenrir through the wall and into his room to see if the man was present. Bastien was fully clothed, lying strewn across his bed with a flagon of wine still in his hand. Well, it had been in his hand anyway. Now most of it had been poured across his expensive bedding. As he kept his eyes on the man, I carefully tried the door to see if it was locked. Why was I being so secretive? Why had I not called this man out for a duel? All knew that I could outfight most of the retinue, if not all. They knew my strengths and they would not push those. They also knew they could use my pious and honourable nature to their advantage. What they did not know was that I had my angel. He was a dark one. He gave me God's permission to do some unthinkable things. Tonight would cement the fact that evil things happen to those who tried to attack me with violent words or physical violence. As the door opened, it creaked and groaned. The man stirred but did not move much before his snores restarted. Oh, this awakening would be rude and fierce. I walked to the edge of the bed and stood over the snoring, sleeping beauty. Fen and I both revelled in the joy of what was going to happen. I would not wake him with a kiss. Oh no. I would wake him with a bite. We became the werewolf. We became a giant thing, dark-pelted, massive, fierce with burning eyes. When we change, I feel a surge of power in my body. I feel the accompanying presence of Fenrir in my mind. It's a glorious feeling, a feeling like no other. When I was younger, I thought it was wrong to be the beast. I now admit I look forward to it every time we transform. I reached down and grabbed the back of the man's neck. It took him a moment to realize that he'd been grabbed at all. I pushed his face into the bed. After a few seconds, he woke and started to realize that all was not well. The flagon fell to the floor from his flailing hands as he began to try and get free from my grip. There was no way he was escaping the gigantic clawed paw from holding him rock solid where he was, though. I felt some pride again in my strength. Yet again, it was a sin that I would repent for later. He tried to protest his treatment by yelling for help. I easily stopped the noise as I pushed him deeper into his soft, comfortable mattress and pillows. A secondary and rewarding outcome of this undertaking was that he started to panic as he was slowly starting to be suffocated in his own luxury. A luxury I had never in my life known. I pushed him harder again until he went limp and quiet as he passed out from lack of breath. I lifted him and brought his face to 6 inches or so in front of my snout. He was so close that his beard and hair were disturbed by my breathing. I knew he was still alive and that he would recover in a few moments, and his first waking instant would be facing me eye to eye in this fearsome form. I wanted him to be utterly terrified. I wanted this man to think that he was facing a demon from the very bowels of hell itself. He came to and slowly opened his eyes to look into mine. Those blazing, almond, fire-filled orbs stared into his crystal blues. The look of shock on his face was so rewarding to my heart. His revulsion and horror were beautiful to behold. He opened his mouth to cry out. I squeezed his neck to stop him, and the scream he tried to let free turned into a weak gurgle. He was completely powerless. He was at my mercy. Unfortunately for him, I had little to give. He warranted none in my mind. I leaned forward, holding his stare before closing my eyes as if to plant a kiss. But it was no kiss. Heavily, I bit. I felt my teeth tear his skin. The intense taste of blood came as a joyful reward as I rived the flesh and tore through the cartilage of his nose. I jerked my head twice as I gripped the lump of meat to remove it from his face, and as his head was violently shaken, he started a feeble protest before it was torn free. It was now mine.
I got your nose,
said Fen. A trick King Stephen had played on a much younger me came to both of our minds as we laughed. Bastien raised a hand to try and remove my bite, but it was too late as I lifted my muzzle to allow the flesh of his face fall down my throat. I reveled in this moment. He had laughed at me. This was his reward. The man reached for my face and touched my snout. I snatched at his hand, and as he withdrew it with haste and shock, I removed his fingers. Now the horror was plain as he looked at the mess that was his hand. I crunched the mouthful with some relish and let fall the golden stone-encrusted rings that had been on those digits. His destroyed face followed those gewgaws to the floor.
Don't kill. just injure and leave the man with a story. Let's all know what happened in this place here. Make 'em live in fear, and we can maybe hint in the court that there is a cost of trying to make a fool of William Marshal.
Fenrir's advice rang in my head. Listening to his guidance, I wanted to do the man one more grievous injury before leaving him to tell his story to his fellows.
You've already taken from him his sword arm, William. Don't be too generous in your wrath, will you?
Said the wolf soul. My target was still staring at his ruined hand. I placed him on his bed, seated, and patted him on his head. His eyes swept from his stumpy hand to my face. Those eyes were full of confusion and pain. I placed a finger on my lips, much as my wet nurse had done to me as a child. This confused the man, but he tried to copy me with the hand I had ruined. A ruined hand below a ruined nose on that once handsome, rich face. Oh, how this would stir terror in my noble fellows. I turned and left the room, gathering my garments from the seat by the door.
Thank you for listening to Werewolf the podcast. Thank you for Gregory Alexander Sharp doing a wonderful job of William, and you can get his books down in the links below in the description. There's loads of things in the description, as I said before. Just go down there and you can join the Facebook group, which is pretty popular and stuff. And if you like this, share it with someone that you know is as strangely minded as yourself. Thanks for listening. Bye.